Hi, in this video I'll read paragraphs 12 to 15 from the introduction of Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach's Versuch, über, wahre Art das Clavier zu spielen. And then I'll talk a bit. Okay. Zur Eigenschaft eines guten Clavichords gehört, dass es außer einem guten, nachsingenden, schmeichelnden Ton die gehörige Anzahl Tasten habe, welche sich wenigstens von dem großen C bis ins dreigestrichenes E erstrecken muss. Dieses dreigestrichenes E ist deswegen nötig, damit man manches Mal andere Sachen darauf probieren könne, indem die Komponisten gern so hoch setzen, weil andere Instrumente dieses dreigestrichenes E noch so ziemlich bequem haben können. Diese Tasten müssen ein richtiges Gewicht in sich haben, welches den Finger wieder in die Höhe hebt. Der Bezug muss vertragen können, dass man es sowohl ziemlich angreifen als schmeicheln kann und dadurch in den Stand gesetzt wird, alle Arten des Forte und Piano rein und deutlich herauszubringen. Verträge es dieses nicht, so werden in einem Falle die Saiten überschrien und der Spieler kann seine Stärke nicht brauchen. Im anderen Falle wird es entweder gar nicht oder unrein und undeutlich ansprechen. Ein guter Flügel muss, ebenfalls außer dem guten Ton und den gehörigen Tasten, eine gleiche Befiederung haben. Die Probe hiervon ist, wenn man die kleinen Manieren nett und leicht herausbringen kann und wenn jeder Taste gleichgeschwinde anspricht, nachdem man durch einen gleichen und geringen Druck mit dem Nagel von Daumen ihre Reihe überstrichen hat. Die Traktierung eines Flügels muss nicht zu leicht und läppisch sein. Die Tasten müssen nicht zu tief fallen, die Finger einigen Widerstand haben und von den Tangenten wieder aufgehoben werden. Hingegen muss er aber auch nicht zu schwer niederzudrücken sein. Denen zu gefallen, welche noch keine Instrumente von dieser vorgeschriebenen Weite besitzen, habe ich meine Probestücke so eingerichtet, dass sie auf einem Instrumente von 4 Oktaven können gespielt werden. Beide Arten von Instrumenten müssen gut temperiert sein, indem man durch die Stimmung der Quinten, Quarten, Probierung der kleinen und großen Terzien und ganzer Akkorde den meisten Quinten besonders so viel von ihrer größten Reinigkeit abnimmt, dass es das Gehör kaum merkt und man alle 24 Tonarten gut brauchen kann. Durch Probierung der Quarten hat man den Vorteil, dass man die nötige Schwebung der Quinten deutlicher hören kann, weil die Quarten ihrem Grundtone näher liegen als die Quinten. Sind die Klaviere so gestimmt, so kann man sie wegen der Ausübung mit Recht für die reinste Instrumente unter allen ausgeben, indem zwar einige reiner gestimmt, aber nicht gespielt werden. Auf dem Klavier spielt man aus allen 24 Tonarten gleich rein und, welches wohlzumerken, vollstimmig, ungeachtet die Harmonie wegen der Verhältnisse die geringste Unreinigkeit sogleich entdeckt. Durch diese neue Art zu temperieren sind wir weitergekommen als vordem, obschon die alte Temperatur so beschaffen war, dass einige Tonarten reiner waren, als man noch jetzo bei vielen Instrumenten antrifft. Bei manchem anderen Musico würde man vielleicht die Unreinigkeit eher vermerken, ohne eine Klangmesser dabei nötig zu haben, wenn man die hervorgebrachten melodischen Töne harmonisch hören sollte. Diese Melodie betrügt uns oft und lässt uns nicht eher ihre unreinen Töne verspüren, bis die Unreinigkeit so groß ist, als kaum bei manchem schlecht gestimmten Klaviere. Jeder Klavierist soll von Rechts wegen einen guten Flügel und auch ein gutes Clavichord haben, damit er auf beiden allerlei Sachen abwechselnd spielen könne. Wer mit einer guten Art auf dem Clavichord spielen kann, wird solches auch auf dem Flügel zuwege bringen können, aber nicht umgekehrt. Man muss also das Clavichord zur Erlernung des guten Vortrags und den Flügel, um die gehörige Kraft in die Finger zu kriegen, brauchen. Spielt man beständig auf dem Clavichord, so wird man viel Schwierigkeiten antreffen, auf dem Flügel fortzukommen. Man wird also die Klaviersachen, wobei eine Begleitung von anderen Instrumenten ist, und welche also wegen der Schwäche des Clavichords auf dem Flügel gehört werden müssen, mit Mühe herausbringen. Was aber mit vieler Arbeit schon muss gespielt werden, das kann unmöglich die Wirkung haben, die es haben soll. Man gewöhnt sich bei beständigem Spielen auf dem Clavichord an, die Tasten gar zu sehr zu schmeicheln, dass folglich die Kleinigkeiten, indem man nicht den hinlänglichen Druck zur Anschlagung des Tangenten auf dem Flügel gibt, nicht allezeit ansprechen werden. Man kann sogar mit der Zeit, wenn man bloß auf einem Clavichord spielt, die Stärke aus den Fingern verlieren, die man vorher hatte. Spielt man beständig auf dem Flügel, so gewöhnt man sich an, in einer Farbe zu spielen, und der unterschiedliche Anschlag, welchen bloß ein guter Clavichordspieler auf dem Flügel herausbringen kann, bleibt verborgen. So wunderbar es auch scheint, indem man glauben sollte, alle Finger müssten auf einerlei Flügel einerlei Ton herausbringen. Man kann gar leicht die Probe machen, und zwei Personen, wovon der eine ein gutes Clavichord spielt, der andere aber bloß ein Flügelspieler ist, auf diesem letzteren Instrumente ein Stück mit einerlei Manieren kurz hintereinander spielen lassen und hernach urteilen, ob sie beide einerlei Wirkung hervorgebracht haben. So, just a few things. That great C that Bach, the great C is the C 2 octaves below middle C. And the E he talks about is the E 2 octaves above the E above middle C. So it's that C and that E. And so the range of the clavichord is the 4 octaves from the low C to the high C. And then those 4 extra notes, the C sharp, D, D sharp and E. That's, so the great C, that's that note, and the E is that note. The other thing he says, the feathering on a harpsichord, and that is, on a harpsichord the strings are plucked, and how they're plucked is, the key is like a lever, and it pushes up a jack, which is like a stick, a short stick, and sticking out of the side of the top of this jack is a plectrum, and that plectrum plucks the string. And it was the case that the material of these plectrums were, what they used was the thick part of the feather, the stem of the feather. And there, hence the term feathering. And when what Bach was saying about the, testing if the keys react fast enough, and what he said was the test, what he was talking about with the nail of the thumb was running it along the keyboard like that to test it. So that's what he's saying there. And what he says about the qualities of a good clavichord and a good harpsichord they apply the same to a modern piano. And you will have that same, what he says about the set of strings, and if they're not, you have to be able to attack it and caress it. And that'll be the same on a modern piano too. If, they will shriek if it's not done ideally. The strings are, it's not, all that whole part of it, if that's not done properly, it will shriek, and it does apply. The same with the keys. They should be, they should react with equal speed. If you have a key that's slower than others, that's no use. It's just less than ideal. So what he says there is relevant. Oh, and when he's talking about the tuning with the beats, what I translated as the beats, and that's kind of like the official word for it, but what those are is when you're tuning, if you hear an octave that's perfectly in tune, the sound of that octave will ring true. It'll be a constant sound. Whereas when it's out of tune, you're going to hear a sort of a swelling, and it'll go like wah 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 wah, sort of like along those lines. And that's what you listen to when you're tuning a keyboard instrument, or you'll as well, if you're tuning an electric guitar using harmonics, you'll play the two harmonics on the two strings, and when you adjust the string and the sound rings true of those two, the strings are in tune. And the way it is with tuning is that if you tune all the intervals pure, like the fifths pure, the 12 notes don't fit inside the octave. They're bigger than an actual octave. So in order for them to all fit in, you have to squeeze the 12 notes into the octave, which means, and how you do that is you reduce the interval, the width of the interval of certain tones. And in this way that Bach is talking about, you do that mostly with the interval of the fifth. So you take away from its purity. And when he talks about listening to the fourth, that they're closer to the bottom note, because an interval always has the top and bottom note. And the fourth is closer to that bottom note than the fifth is. And so when he talks about you can hear the necessary beats of the fifth clearer when you listen to the fourth, well, that's some practical advice from Bach if you are tuning your instrument. So I just wanted to explain that. And the last thing I wanted to say is about the clavichord. And in the video where I read the previous paragraphs, in paragraph 11, I translate flugel as grand piano. Because as far as it's relevant to us, I deliberately called it grand piano. But this time I'm translating flugel as harpsichord. And in Bach's day, a harpsichord would be referred to as a flugel and not a cembalo. So people would call it a flugel. So they'd be talking about clavier and flugel. And that's a bit like, what I was saying about going back in time and being surprised how modern people are. In German-speaking countries, a grand piano will be referred to as a Flügel, and pianos in general will be referred to as Klaviere. Ein Klavier is a piano. And so if they were to go back into Bach's day, they'd hear him talking about a Flügel and a Clavier, the exact same as nowadays, even though they're different instruments he's talking about. So, it's just another small little thing to show just how surprised those little things, how modern the people are and how little changes. So, and this time I translated it as a harpsichord because he goes into more specifics. And when you talk about the Tangenten, which are those jacks that I was talking about that have the plectrum on them, it doesn't work when I keep calling it a grand piano. But what's interesting in these paragraphs is you see exactly Bach's opinion of the clavichord. And it's not, you don't necessarily, I haven't seen it projected in, if I look at a video or something where they present the instruments, the relationships between the clavichord and the harpsichord has never been, as in my experience, has not been addressed. And when you look at the clavichord, it kind of looks like the consolation prize compared to the harpsichord, given the size. It's relatively small. It's like a long rectangular suitcase, can be. And you'd imagine it's like the Casio keyboards of the time, and it's something you'd use if you didn't get your hands on a harpsichord. But you can see in Bach's estimation of it, the clavichord is the heart of the two keyboard instruments, and that he says in order to get the art of good interpretation, good performance, good execution, you achieve that on the clavichord. And he says the Flügel is there to strengthen your fingers. And he says that if you play in a good way on the clavichord, you'll be able to do the same on a harpsichord, but not the other way round. So if you play the harpsichord well, you won't play the clavichord well. And the clavichord player brings to the harpsichord what a mere harpsichord player, as he calls them, can't bring. And there's, in terms of the difference between a clavichord and a harpsichord, there's not much difference between a piano and a harpsichord. You can do everything basically on a piano that you can do on a harpsichord. You could argue I've had, in 2 times in my life, I've had harpsichord lessons, and so I have experience on the harpsichord. And yeah, people could argue, there's all so many ways to articulate that you do on a harpsichord that you don't do on the piano. But you can articulate on the piano as much as you articulate on the harpsichord. And there's not much difference. And Bach as well, and there's even less difference between a forte piano and a modern piano. There's not much difference. And Bach compares the clavichord to the forte piano. If you remember in that last video that I did with the previous chapters, up to paragraphs up to paragraph 11, that he said that the clavichord shares all the beauties of the forte piano, but it has these elements extra: the vibrato, the beben, which, in earthquake terms, that would be like a tremor, where you can kind of add a vibrato to a note, just like a violin player would add it to a note. A right-handed violin player. And the portato, das Tragen der Töne, which is, when a note notes have a dot and a slur on it. That's the portato. And the element that he talks about of being able to apply a pressure to every note after he's pressed it. So, in the way, the clavichord distinguishes itself from the forte piano, from the harpsichord, and from the modern piano. And Bach says you can judge a piano player most precisely on the clavichord. So you can see Bach's opinion of the clavichord and the harpsichord, that you can't, they're indispensable. You can't have one without the other, ideally, in Bach's opinion. And he places the clavichord on the highest. The clavichord is the heart of good performance, good interpretation, good technique. And the clavichord, is the heart, and the harpsichord is there to strengthen the fingers and necessary for the volume, because the clavichord is a weak tone. You need the harpsichord to play to accompany other instruments. So, it doesn't seem like that. It hasn't been projected to me, at least, that those people interested in authentic instruments are completely aware of that relationship between the two instruments. So if you're playing the harpsichord and then you play the clavichord like you're playing the harpsichord, well, then you're going about it backwards, because you're not going to play the clavichord well. And so if you play the clavichord and figure out how to play it properly and exhaust its potential, they, according to Bach, they'll be able to do on the harpsichord what a harpsichord player can't do. So that's interesting. I mean, you can think about what he's saying there. But in terms of how that's relevant for us, playing modern pianos, he's saying he said all those touches that a clavichord player can bring to the harpsichord, they remain hidden, undiscovered, verborgen. And given that the modern grand piano does not share those qualities with a clavichord, that whole element of technique is missing. And just how much of a gap is there when it's just absent from technique. And it could be that even a player as great as Evgeny Kissin, when he has to add a ritardando in the second movement of the Moonlight Sonata, that it's that element of technique that's missing, that's causing him, that makes him need to do that. And how many more places will that missing technique affect the pieces. You know, Evgeny Kissin said himself that he has a problem with Beethoven. And I know that's a problem in Evgeny Kissin's terms. It's not like a normal person's problem with Beethoven. But if you think of what Bach is saying about the clavichord, and you don't think it, if you don't think it applies to Mozart or Beethoven, it's that would be like saying Jimi Hendrix bears no relation to, you know, how Kirk Hammett plays the guitar, or Jimmy Page, you know, has no influence on Slash's playing. You know, it's just Beethoven will agree with Bach. He's read those words and he'll have agreed with that what Bach says on the clavichord. So will Mozart. And so just how much is missing? And that's something that's lies maybe in waiting to discover, because, you know, if you've deciphered the book, if you've figured it out, because Bach doesn't spoon feed, but if you have, it could be that when you do, the clue to how to play good clavichord, he provides that. Given, you know, what he says he's going to provide in the preface. And if he's a man of his word, and I really think he does, I think he speaks the truth, well then there might be a whole element of technique that's gone forgotten, given the fact that we don't, you know, that the grand piano is not really different from a forte piano or a harpsichord, and that the real heart of playing lies in the clavichord. And we might not have any clavichord players who play in the good way that Bach is talking about, who really know how to exhaust the potential of the clavichord. And what they do is they play the clavichord like they play the harpsichord. So I think that's interesting. But you're definitely getting to know Bach there, getting to know him better, and you know, and that practical advice for the tuning, that'll be really good. You know, that's not advice to take lightly. It'll have a huge effect. All these things he'll say that seem so small are actually big. The knock-on effect is unimaginable. And what he says there about, you know, the test to get two people, one who's merely a harpsichord player, the other who's a clavichord player, and get them to play the same piece with the same ornaments on the same harpsichord, and then see if they don't create a different effect. That clavichord player will create a different effect on the modern grand piano, just the same that a modern grand piano player won't be able to create, because how do you develop a technique on an instrument that doesn't have doesn't respond directly to those techniques? And the response a piano will have, or a harpsichord will have, to the techniques that a good clavichord player applies, they're all going to be indirect. And it'll affect the color you produce. So yeah, that's that. In the next video, I'm gonna finish off the introduction. I'll do the remaining. I'll read the remaining paragraphs. So that'll be the preface and the introduction that's now on these videos complete, and we can go on from there. I read them through at the start, so you know, if you're not interested in hearing me talk, you can watch the beginnings of the videos and still get it. And at some stage you could probably get your own copy of the book, and that means you can look at the words, you can follow, and you can know what he says. And Bach won't be some mystery figure. He'll be part of your life. His voice will be in your head just as he's in mine. And he's a great companion to have. He's like a guiding light. So if you're interested in that, please like and subscribe, and you know, tell your friends. And I'll see you on the next video. Thanks. Bye.